Thanks for joining us for the fourth in the Small County Wellness Center's series of webinars. This one is titled Meditation, Spirituality, and Religion, and in a few moments, Dr. Anne MacRae.
Actually, that's not the title.
Oh, I'm sorry.
I think you're looking at one of my handouts. This one's called Spirituality, Rituals, and Traditions.
Ah, got it. Sorry, everyone. Okay. As usual, you are all on mute, and if you want to ask a question, you just need to type it into the question box or click the hand icon by your name, and we'll be stopping at various intervals to ask for questions. I sent out the materials to all of you who registered yesterday. If you didn't receive them, send me a note in the question box and I'll get them to you. And this webinar is being recorded, so once it's available for viewing, we will send you the link and you can send it on to anyone else to view it. And
Okay. Welcome, everybody. For those of you who are new to these webinars, welcome. Those of you who've been on webinars with me before, welcome back. And on this front slide, just basically as the title, the date, my name and titles. I work for both Trinity County Behavioral Health, and I'm on a pre-retirement track trying to retire from San Jose State University. But this email is my San Jose State one. It is it's very easy to reach me there, even if I'm nowhere near campus. I do pick it up. So don't have any hesitation on asking me any questions after the presentation. I do encourage a lot of participation in my webinars. Don't be shy. Ask questions anytime. But I know how it goes. Sometimes you have to reflect on something or think about it, and you come up with a question an hour later or the next day or whatever. Don't hesitate to contact me. So, okay, let's get started. Won't let this go anywhere. Oh dear. Okay. There we go. Okay, sorry about that. I always put objectives on any presentation I do, so you can, it's a method of accountability. You can come back to me and say, you didn't cover that, or you said you were going to cover this. So I like to have it up front, what it is I am intending on doing. And basically, to summarize these in kind of a nutshell, I'm hoping by the end of this webinar, people will have a clear idea of what spirituality encompasses, what it is and what it isn't, how it's related to recovery. A very important point is what is staff roles in addressing spirituality, what should we do or not do, and we're going to have some conversations about that. I think whenever you start getting into spiritual beliefs and practices, you're on pretty sensitive ground, and a lot of what we're doing in recovery and wellness these days is about respect, and so respecting the diversity of what those beliefs may be. Some information on how to create partnerships with the faith-based community. Not everything can or should be done within a wellness center, but you can make great contacts, and again, I think that helps clarify everybody's roles. And I'm going to talk about specifically traditions and rituals and how they're related to spirituality and how they're expressions of spirituality, and that gets into some nice concrete, visible, observable kinds of things. And I will briefly touch on the idea of deciding whether you actually want to develop a spiritually based program, and I have a handout for that if you haven't seen it already. Okay, so that's a very ambitious agenda. We'll see where we go. Before I go any further, however, I do want to backtrack, and I like to be able to put things in a context. Some issues we're having with dealing with spirituality in the current environment and in wellness comes from a very long history of ebbs and flows and beliefs. And so I thought it'd be helpful to just spend a minute on that. If you look at the top right of your screen, it says mental illness as a spiritual phenomenon. probably for most of our human history, uh, the only understanding people had of mental illness was that it was because it's not physical symptoms. You're not bleeding, you don't have a broken bone. So it was often attributed to some kind of higher power or spiritual presence. Um, in some parts of the world, that was considered a very positive thing, particularly in Central African cultures and in some Native American cultures. If you showed signs of what we now consider mental illness, it would have been thought of as being touched by God in a special way. Most of us, however, grew up on what's called a Eurocentric philosophy, primarily coming from Europe. And that has been the dominant one, where if there is a religious interpretation of mental illness, it's usually in a very negative way. Possession by the devil, something else that is viewed as sinful or negative. And that was how mental illness was viewed for a very, very long time. Then in dark, if you go around the circle, in paradigm shift is bolded out. And whenever I talk about a paradigm shift, it's a kind of an uncomfortable stage where past beliefs are butting heads with newer beliefs. So it's always kind of an ebb and flow situation. It's not real concrete that one day it was this and the next day it's that. It covers the shift, which is why I always have everything in question marks when we're talking about a paradigm shift. Basically, what started happening as the idea of institutions arose, or places where people with mental illness were taken care of and or treated, there was this kind of push between the religious beliefs and an emerging science. But even though there was some science or some kind of medical influence, there was certainly psychiatrists and people like that in the institutions. There was still quite a dominance of religious beliefs. And in fact, most of the early care of people with mental illness was done by religious orders. So there was kind of starting this tension between religion and science. And guess who won was the dominance of the allopathic model down at the bottom of the screen now. Allopathic means Western medicine, what we consider the medical profession in Western culture. There's a lot of different reasons that happened, and it is still continuing to happen. One is that there was starting to get a repertoire of evidence that some medical intervention helped. That was certainly a factor. Two was the rise of pharmacology. And this actually didn't even start to the 50s in any kind of meaningful way. But once we started creating medicines that could at least help with some of the symptoms of mental illness, this Western medicine model really, really took hold. I also want to point out, and sometimes in the wellness recovery community, they don't really like to talk about this, but it was also pushed this rise in a medical model also came from families and people with mental illness because they were tired of being seen as being sinful or that they were doing something wrong. You may remember, those of you who are a little older, I think was it the 70s? That was the decade of the brain. Was it the 80s? I don't remember. Sorry. But organizations like NAMI very much wanted to have mental illness seen as a specific disease process rather than something to feel guilty about. And the thought behind that was that it would reduce stigma and it would spur on science research to come up with better treatments. And that's all very nice, but I think, again, it reinforced this idea of mental illness as a unidimensional, meaning a medical disease, which therefore should be treated by medicine. The problem with the allopathic model in medicine is that it's very compartmentalized, it's very component driven. Let me explain this. If you go into a doctor for anything, whether it's a symptom of a mental illness or a physical illness, they don't really want to hear about where you live and what you do and what your relationships are like and what your belief system is. It's very much geared towards treating a specific component or treating a specific symptom. And that there's a lot of breakthroughs during this era of dominance of a medical model. And I think to a certain point it did reduce some stigma. If people could be seen as having a disease like any other disease, diabetes or arthritis or whatever, it did help reduce some of the stigma. Right now we're going through another paradigm shift again. Not so much talking about mental illness as talking about mental health and wellness, of course. I don't think we're at that last step yet. I see us in this paradigm shift, which is always a little uncomfortable. We're starting to see and recognize that illness is, health is not just the absence of illness. There's a lot more true health. And as I've brought up many times, the dimensions of recovery include the environmental, the spiritual, the cultural, the social. All of those aspects have to work together, not just about signs and symptoms of a disease. You look at it all together to determine what health is all about. And we are heading, I believe, towards a better integrated model of mind, body, and spirit as a view of health and wellness. Now, I just gave you about 1,500 years of history in 3 minutes. So obviously it's a little superficial, but the reason I wanted to do that is so people can see even well-meaning trends can have some negative sides, and our views are evolving. I don't think we're quite there yet, but they are evolving, and people are starting to question what does it really mean to be mentally healthy. A lot of information. Any questions or comments? You all with me? Okay.
Question.
Was there a question, Shoshana?
No, not yet.
Oh, okay. So let's talk a little bit about what is spirituality. I think the term is often misused. And actually, to be honest, the term has changed. The connotations of it has changed over the years. At one time, people had a very difficult time separating out spirituality from religion. All of the recent definitions specifically do not tie it to a particular religious persuasion. And I think, as you'll see later on, this is a very important factor when we're talking about addressing spirituality in health and wellness. I like to use dynamic interpretations. I don't think you either are spiritual or not spiritual. I don't think once you have spirituality, you always have it. I think the best interpretations look at spirituality as a dynamic, ongoing process. I love words like journey or quest. I don't know, maybe we'll never get there, but it is the journey. So understanding the meaning of life, it's not like one day you know it and the next day you don't, or vice versa. It's a quest to understand meaning. To be accepting of faith. Again, faith tends to be a religious-oriented term. You can call it whatever you want. You can call it karma or fate or serendipity, or but just the idea that there's something that maybe you don't have control over, and there's something greater than the individual. That's what faith is. Recognizing the non-corporeal, meaning the non-physical aspects of the world. This was one of the drawbacks with a totally medical model, is that it was only looking at the physical. How are people acting, behaving, looking, and that was the only way they could conceptualize how to do treatment. Once you add a spiritual component, you're looking at other aspects of the world and the person that you can't measure and you can't hold in your hand. And that's part of a spiritual orientation. Searching for the sacred. From the traditional word, what sacred means is different from the ordinary. And what is special about a place or a person or yourself? That's what searching for the sacred means. And then a very important one, particularly I think as we go on to talk about healthcare, is spirituality is also about connecting. And whether it's to other people, to the earth or the universe, or a higher being or God, it's a feeling of not being alone. A spiritual persuasion very much strives towards connecting to something outside of yourself. Any questions? Again, if you go to the literature, you're going to find hundreds of different definitions of spirituality. I gave you basically how I am using it in terms of adapting it to a wellness model. And again, it is very dynamic. It's an ongoing process. Any questions or comments? Don't be shy. All right, later on I'm going to ask you more specific questions. I hope people speak up. Okay, so why is this important in terms of addressing it at all in a wellness center? And I think because our paradigm in wellness centers is recovery, it's important to look at the shared values. What does recovery have in common with spirituality? And these are the ones that seemed to me that to be very obvious in the recovery paradigm and very obvious in the spirituality realm. So they're both about meaning making and purpose. They're both about inclusion and acceptance, hope and healing, focus and clarity, love and forgiveness, and structure and function. The structure and function I'm going to talk about a little more when I talk about traditions and rituals, but basically this is how you organize your time, what do you do at certain times, how do you express those internal feelings of spirituality. Do you go to church on Sunday? Do you have Shabbat dinner on Friday? Those kind of things provide a daily structure and a functional way of participating in the world. Wellness very much embraces, recovery very much embraces this idea of having productive and meaningful daily activities. Again, the very nature of talking about spirituality sometimes gets very sensitive, and people can disagree with me. I actually like hearing disagreements, and that's okay. We can think differently of it. Does this make sense that it is both in the recovery realm and the spirituality realm, these features? Okay. We'll move on. Hmm?
Not yet.
Okay. So, I've just laid out a scenario where wellness and spirituality share a lot of things. It's almost like you can't do one without another in a way. So what could possibly go wrong? And there's a whole lot. And again, I'm going to trigger back on some of the history stuff too, because there's reasons, there's very specific reasons why psychiatry, psychology, professional mental health has shied away from addressing spirituality in the past. The first one is that it's just very easy to disrespect another's beliefs. If you don't understand them, you can take them out of context. So it's very important to talk to people. If you know someone who practices Buddhism, work with them on making sure that any ritual that you may want to use from a Buddhist tradition is okay with them, and it feels okay and it feels respectful. Probably the biggest problem that we've had over the years is exploitation. People with serious mental illness, particularly ones who are symptomatic, are often very vulnerable people. They are open to suggestions almost to a fault, and they can be manipulated because they're pretty fragile. Now, I'm not saying all people with mental illness are like that, but people with in the throes of an acute illness or a very long-standing illness are pretty easy to exploit. And religious organizations in particular have done that throughout history. On one hand, you look at it as a positive thing. They go out and share their beliefs and share their resources with the most vulnerable among us, and that can be a very positive thing. But sometimes there's just been too many strings attached. Unless you get baptized into this faith, and unless you do everything I tell you, you're not going to get the help you need. So there's always been this very big concern And this is true in the clergy, it's true in mental health, it's true in all sorts of things. People who are professionals in their areas need to understand how much power they actually have over people's lives, and it's a little scary, and you have to respect that. Professionals have been taught that a lot over the years, and the answer is you just avoid those sensitive subjects. That hasn't really worked. It's like, you know, treat the whole person except for their right arm. It doesn't feel normal. I also want to point out that as wellness centers are more and more being run by peers, that this also applies to you. Any of you who are peer specialists may not even be aware of that there is a power differential. You see yourself as, I'm the same as this person I'm working with. I understand them because we both have a shared lived experience. That's true. But you also are in a more successful, stable place. And in a positive way, that's role modeling. In a negative way, you may not realize how much sway you can have over someone. So particularly in the realm of spirituality and religious beliefs, it's extremely important that you dial back a little bit, which gets to my next point of misrepresenting one's expertise. Just because you belong to a certain church or synagogue or temple or whatever doesn't mean that that is your expertise. You are not a priest, you are not a rabbi, you are not a monk, and you need to be careful of not putting your beliefs on others and representing yourself as one who knows a lot about that. You know what it means to you, which is important, but again, some care needs to be given to these kind of relationships when dealing with this topic. I think one thing that happens a lot is you can unintentionally dilute the meaning of sacred beliefs. This happens a lot with rituals and traditions. I'll talk about that a little bit, because so many of them involve activities and icons, you know, art, music, dance, and we love incorporating those things. And I don't think there's anything wrong with that, but you need to be careful that you're not denigrating what the spirituality is of it. You know, for example, dream catchers are used as a common craft item these days. I've made many of them myself. But I'm clear that I am talking about Native American art. I am not necessarily talking about the spiritual beliefs attached to these icons. Proselytizing one's own belief, I actually think I already mentioned that. Your job is not to convert people. Your job is to do what you can to facilitate them finding their own paths of spirituality. One that is a big red flag for me is that unintentionally sometimes these spiritual beliefs that you want to share with people can sabotage some helpful clinical practices. Probably the most common situation that happens in this and causes a lot of tension between the faith-based community and professional mental health services is people who say, oh, you don't need to take your drugs because God's going to cure you. Maybe God will ultimately cure you. That's not my place to say. But in the meantime, these things are in the here and now are helping someone. So it can be done. It can be unintentional or it could be very intentional. But it is an area of tension. There's also a problem of what's supporting what's called pathologic religiosity. That's a mouthful, but clinically what that means is someone who's very dysfunctional behavior is attributed to their religious beliefs. It doesn't mean there's anything wrong with the religious beliefs. It has to do with how that person is interpreting them. If they're very delusional and they say, you know, God told me to kill that person, obviously in our society that is not acceptable. And that's an extreme example, of course. But if someone has a very obsessive or negative, antisocial bent to what they're calling their spirituality or religious beliefs, again, an area of tension. But you have societal norms which people need to, in order to be able to integrate into a community. But if their religious beliefs go against those societal norms, sometimes it really is quite pathologic. And you may need some help. You know, for example, I know of situations where someone has gone to the Catholic parish priest and say, could you please, talk to this person? I'm concerned that what they're interpreting as Catholicism, not the religion itself, how they are interpreting it seems way off base, and it's going to hurt him and it's going to hurt other people. Again, very, very tricky line there. And then there's a possibility of triggering symptoms. If someone grew up in a very rigid, fundamentalist religious tradition, and someone unintentionally says, oh, let's go talk to this minister, he's really good, you can be bringing up all sorts of childhood trauma for them. Celebrating holidays often brings up memories of trauma. We're going to talk about that a little bit when we talk about traditions. So just as a rule of thumb, because spirituality is such a personal thing, and it has been in the past linked much more closely with organized religion, sometimes just trying to have this conversation can have some negative downfall. I just said a whole lot of very controversial things there. Please, someone tell me I'm off base, or you agree or disagree.
There's a hand raised.
Yay!
It may have been in response to your previous question, but
That's okay.
Michelle, are you there? Michelle, you have your hand up. Michelle Rose? We can't hear you if you're speaking. Okay. Well, we do have another comment.
Okay.
Sometimes I hear remarks at the peer. I live in a county where many practice fundamentalist Christianity, and many of them believe in proselytizing. Sometimes I hear remarks at the peer empowerment center that seem to support my way or the highway, or in effect, you're going to hell if you're not Christian. What would you suggest?
That is exactly what happens a lot of the times, and without getting into an argument with someone, I think it's fine to share the observation that these are your personal beliefs and I respect them. However, even within Christianity, there's a lot of different interpretations, and our role here is to accept everyone's beliefs. And I don't think it's out of the realm of our jurisdiction or our power within a wellness center to have it as one of the rules, is be respectful. You can believe whatever you want, but if pushing it on someone else, I think it's appropriate to draw a line. Say you can believe whatever you want. If people want to have conversations with you about that, that's fine. But here in our center, we respect a diversity of religious and spiritual practices as well as cultural practices. And I think you're on pretty firm, even legal ground doing that. You're not outlawing them from talking about what they want to talk about or believing what they want to believe about. Just asking everyone to be respectful of other people's beliefs. It is a tricky one, I know. Any other comments or questions? I know sometimes people have trouble with the audio, and then by the time they feel they can type something, I'm on to the next topic. Don't worry about that. If you're having trouble with the audio, go ahead and type in whatever comment or question you want, even if it's from 3 slides ago. I don't mind backing up. Okay? Shall we move on? All right. So what is the link between spirituality and rituals and traditions? They are linked, but they're not synonymous at all. Here's some definitions here. Traditions are usually carried down through generations, and they may have an overt religious theme, but they can also be patriotic, or they can also have a cultural bond. I consider it some ways all spiritual, because if you go back to those earlier definitions, those trademarks of spirituality, it's about bonding, it's about identity, it's about belonging, it's about trust, it's about hope. So even a 4th of July celebration, even though it has no religious significance, can give one a feeling of spirituality, of belonging, of connecting, of all of those things, and certainly cultural traditions also have that same feeling. It's non-corporeal. It's not about the just the physical sense. And this is why we often have trouble if you've done a lot of traveling like I have, and you go to another country and you watch some routines, some rituals and traditions, you have no idea what their meaning is because you didn't grow up with it. However, there is another aspect of this, and it's the idea of creating new traditions. You know, it seems like by definition traditions are old and are stable. Not necessarily. First of all, traditions are rarely stable. Everything is dynamic. It changes. We don't celebrate Christmas the same way we did 100 years ago, as an example. But then there's also this kind of thing that happens more in America than any other place, because we are so mobile, is that people create new traditions. And sometimes they're very specifically created to fill a void. And this is something I think people working in recovery really need to look at. A lot of the participants that we work with did not grow up with healthy traditions. They may have come from very impoverished, very chaotic backgrounds, sometimes with abuse or other kinds of trauma involved. And they may have moved around a lot. People, say for example, a kid was kicked from foster home to foster home. They don't have that rooting. They don't have those traditions. But we can create them together and encourage them to create them. Rituals are also a specific part, or maybe part of a greater tradition. As a general rule, I don't get too hung up on the terminology. General rule, I consider rituals to be very specific actions where a tradition is something larger. Let's see if I can give an example. A ritual may be lighting a candle on a menorah. Well, obviously, Hanukkah has a much greater focus and much greater aspect of a full tradition. But the lighting of the candle is one ritual that's within that. Sometimes rituals actually can be very personal. You may have a ritual of spending 15 minutes in the morning doing yoga, or you may have a ritual of reading to your child a bedtime story. Those are somewhat, specific to you, but some of the more powerful rituals are shared social experiences. Lighting the fireworks on 4th of July, carving a turkey a certain way, things like that. But whether you are thinking of rituals or traditions, they do have some very powerful shared features. They are ways we give ourselves to provide comfort and structure to daily living. Again, when you're working with people with mental illness, they very often do not have that kind of anchor. So finding ways to create it, even within your own center, can be very comforting and very helpful. And when people have specific structures to their daily life, it can provide some purpose and some motivation. Rituals and traditions often use material objects or icons. They are symbolic representations of one's spirituality, but it is a way that we can do things with them on an observable level and an interactive level. It may include artwork, it may include using different kinds of prayer beads. Many different religions use beads. They are also a means to express creativity and share with a group. Dances, songs, festivals are all rituals and traditions that often have a symbolic, spiritual connotation. Okay. Any questions? All right. So does this mean everyone agrees with me? I really doubt that. But it's okay if you're shy. But don't hesitate to either back me up with a specific example or ask a question or say, I don't get this, I don't think you're right. I accept all feedback. I wanted to include one example of what I'm calling a consciously created tradition. In the last slide I mentioned that people with mental illness often do not have the upbringing that has these wonderful and comforting and meaningful ceremonies that are part of their traditions. However, there are other groups that have fallen into the same category. Probably most obviously is people of African American descent. Um, they often also don't have set traditions within their families, obviously rooted back to their initial coming to this country as slaves. Their culture was literally robbed from them. But also, even though that was a long time ago, the African American community has struggled with identity because they were often viewed as second-class citizens. There was a tremendous amount of stigma, prejudice, discrimination, and that to me is also very much like what people with mental illness go through. But I don't know if you've ever heard of Kwanzaa or if you're familiar with it. This was a consciously created tradition. It just started in the 1960s. And the idea was to give the African American community an alternative to celebrating holidays that really didn't come from their culture or didn't represent their needs as well. There was never any intent to replace Christmas or any other holiday. Many people who celebrate Kwanzaa are in Christian denominations and continue to practice in that faith. But this was a non-religious but very clear created tradition, including 7 days, very much like Hanukkah. And in fact, if you see these pictures with the candles, it is a little bit like a menorah, which is used by Jewish people in Hanukkah. And they do use a lot of icons, carvings, specific food, things like that. But I just wanted you to take a look at each day you're supposed to celebrate something else over these 7 days or honor your traditions in certain ways. And so it's unity, self-determination, working together, support for each other, purpose, creativity, and faith. Sounds pretty much like what we use as the model of recovery. And yet this has nothing to do with mental health or illness. It was created to give people a chance to explore and recognize and promote certain principles. I think it's a very beautiful holiday. It is practiced in African American communities quite a lot. Lately, just really lately, I've always hesitated to do anything with this because I felt, again, it was maybe being disrespectful or robbing somebody else's traditions, and I just didn't quite know what to do with that. A lot of, if you see website postings now, you can see how much what's being called the post-ethnic perspective is coming through. Not that the celebration of African American culture is not important or the celebrating of any other culture isn't important, but there's a greater awareness of shareness. What I'm seeing now on the websites in particular is that although Kwanzaa was and is an African American celebration, they are welcoming anyone who shares these values to highlight them and practice them. So I think that's pretty cool. Just like, let's see, next week is St. Pat's Day. I don't know any Irish people who care that non-Irish people celebrate St. Patrick's Day. It is an Irish thing, but the saying, everybody's Irish on St. Patrick's Day. Even from the very beginning, there was an attempt within mental health to acknowledge these kinds of values and principles. And I'll tell you kind of a funny story. God, it was probably 25 years ago now, so I don't know if this still exists. The outreach arm of the Assertive Community Treatment in San Francisco was called Kujitakalia, which is day 2. Now, my initial thought was, boy, that is really a mouthful for someone who doesn't speak Swahili. Why are we calling this Kujitakalia? But what was interesting, it happened a lot, is they would go out. The outreach people did visits in SROs and homeless people and really tried to connect them. And it was a conversation starter. That someone would introduce themselves, I'm a worker from Kujitakalia, and they would say, Kuchi what? And then you get to talk about, well, what we're all about is self-determination, and I can tell you about the other principles too, and this is what we're aiming for. So it's kind of interesting. I don't know if that branch of assertive community treatment still exists or if it's still called that, but I did think it was interesting how that played out. Okay. Any of you ever heard of Kwanzaa before? Well, next December, as you're putting up snowflakes and Christmas trees and all sorts of other things, you could do a little cultural diversity, branching out, maybe make a sign or a shrine similar to what is used in this picture. Um, if you have people of African American descent in your groups, this is especially touching for them to say, hey, you know, I know about this tradition. Do you celebrate this? Would you like to help me teach other people about it? It would be very, I think, very cool. But no one's heard of it before, huh?
No, someone says sure, and from my point of view, it's been around for a while. I think most people have heard of it.
Okay. Okay. It was started in the mid 1960s, but I was kind of surprised up in Trinity County. Again, I think we have 3 African Americans living in the whole county. That a lot of people did not know about it, but I guess it depends on where you came from. Anything
Hold
else?
on, someone has their hand. So,
hear me?
Abigail?
Yes.
Hi.
Hi.
Hi. So I just thank you for letting us know that Kwanzaa was, so to speak, invented. I didn't know that about it. And we have a few more African Americans here in Nevada County than there are in Trinity County, but not very many.
Right.
But I do notice occasionally around that time of year that Kwanzaa is acknowledged as big holiday. I'm not aware of there ever being a party held for it or much of anything else, but that doesn't mean it happen.
Right, right. And this may be something like this is a way to do some outreach to people who are very underrepresented. You know, for example, maybe you want to invite someone who does celebrate Kwanzaa in for just a little meet and greet with members of your wellness center to explain what it is. In terms of a quote party, my understanding, and I've been involved with some of these, is that each day is dedicated to a different principle, so therefore you may do different things on different days. Like Ujima, day 3, would often be a time when they would do a community project, like fixing the playground or something like that. Kumba, day 6, is when a lot of artistic murals would go up. So there's different ways. There's actually a bunch of websites on this where, you know, figuring out different ways you can celebrate it. But first of all, you know, one of the reasons I specifically brought up Kwanzaa is because it was a created holiday with a very clear, conscious purpose to get African Americans connected back with some of their historic cultural beliefs that kind of got lost, and create some unity and create some pride. So it was very conscious, but it doesn't mean it can't be shared with others. And the other reason, as I said, I picked this one out is because I think it is interesting that their principles are so in line with the principles of recovery. So there's a lot of different things you could do with it.
Yeah, I like seeing this, and it's nice that it doesn't appear to be competing with Christmas to see how many gifts can be given.
Absolutely. In fact, most of the people that I know that celebrate Kwanzaa really, really downplay the materialistic aspects. I mean, you know, you use icons, you use candles, you use food, you use different things, but it doesn't have the same element of materialism that the secular version of Christmas has had. And they're not competing in terms of it's not one or the other. As I said, a lot of people who celebrate Kwanzaa are Christian and have no problem you know, putting these two things together.
Nice.
Okay, thank you. Any
Thank
other
you.
comments? Any other comments or questions? All right. Now I'm going to talk about specific rituals and traditions. And by the way, something I should have said earlier, I actually rarely use the word ritual except when I'm teaching. I don't use it much in clinical practice because in my experience, it has some very negative connotations. I have worked with people who have been ritualistically and sadistically abused. I have worked with people who have obsessive compulsive disorders and their rituals truly are pathologic, meaning that they get in the way of daily life. So it's a word I use with caution. But in this sense, when we're talking about the actions involved in larger traditions or spirituality, I'm using it. But just be a little cautious that sometimes we have to be careful of words. Sometimes words can trigger some very painful experiences. I divided this up into 3 different ways when I was trying to group and figure out how do I start talking about this plethora, this huge amount of rituals and traditions. I'm focusing on 3 different areas. Personal practices, well, you'll see what the 3 areas are. Let's talk about the first one, is personal practices. I see this as rituals and traditions that honor and nurture inner strength. There's a whole lot of them. Some people would argue with me listing meditation as separate from these other things because one school of thought is all of these are basically meditation. Yoga involves some physical parts, with breathing. Mindfulness is a very kind of new approach to meditation that's quite secular in a way, but specific practice on how one lives and thinks and relaxes. Prayer falls into that same category, as well as relaxation techniques. Now, interesting from a clinical and a secular point of view, this stuff is just starting to be used on a heavy basis. We do a fair amount of mindfulness-related things now. Obviously, relaxation, we may tie it with biofeedback. We may use certain meditative practices to address anxiety. So that, there's definitely a clinical way of looking at this, but from a spiritual way of looking at it or a simple wellness recovery perspective, these are all techniques or approaches to honor one's inner strength. It can get a little confusing sometimes what all these terms are. I did send you an extra PDF file on meditation, spirituality, and religion. I just got it from the web, to tell you the truth, but I thought they did a really nice job explaining what these different practices are and where they came from and some of the differences. What is the difference between Christian prayer and Muslim prayer? What's the difference between yoga and clinical relaxation? It looked at the different nuances of all of this. Not every belief system practices these in the same ways. However, I am a student of history as well as a student of many things because I love learning. Pretty much every culture throughout history has in some way or form focused on some aspect of this, some control of your inner strength and beliefs, and have very specific rituals, if you will, on addressing this. Okay, so hopefully you find that handout handy. Now I'm really going to push for you to talk to me with 2 questions. Just in terms of these personal practices, mindfulness, prayer, yoga, whatever, how can or should, and that's an important part, how can or should spirituality-based personal practices be incorporated into your wellness center? Can it or should it, and what do you do? And the follow-up question there is, how can or should wellness center staff encourage or support spiritually-based personal practices of peers outside the center? So I'm talking about 2 things. What, if anything, can or should you do within your actual programming, physically within your wellness center, as opposed to how can or should you support people in finding those spiritually-based personal practices outside of your center? Anyone have anything to share? Nobody does relaxation groups? Does anyone make any referrals or suggestions for people to go to outside sources?
There is a hand raised. Hold on.
Yay.
Luann Baldwin, are you there?
Hi.
Hello? Is Luann there? We're not hearing you if you're speaking. Well, maybe she'll...
Okay. Again, if you're having trouble with the audio, you can type in a response. I will answer it. And don't worry about the timing. I move on with slides so I don't lose people. But if there's something you want to ask from a few slides ago, that's okay too. But let me answer this a little bit. I'm a little leery of doing anything involved with actual prayer physically in the center because I do respect that not everyone has the same beliefs, and most times prayer practices are specific to a specific belief system. So I would be a little cautious of that. However, the broader issues of mindfulness, various meditative practices, yoga, I certainly know a lot of wellness centers who do groups like that. But you should also consider talking to someone about where else outside of the center they may find some comfort with that. And it could be, I know up here in Trinity County sometimes we bring groups out to the Gampa, which is a Buddhist temple. They have beautiful meditation gardens and some very nice ceremonies, and they always welcome us. So, you know, there's various things like that you can do, or you may personally not want to be involved at all. But I've certainly been in a situation with people going through some serious grieving or catastrophic kinds of things who have already told me they belong to a particular church or group. And I say, you know, have you called the pastor? If, you know, maybe you can meet and talk with him. He may be able to give you more guidance on that than I can. This is not really my role, but I can encourage someone to seek out those resources. And I do know that some of them, not all, have been incredibly helpful with some of our clients going through serious crises. Okay. So the next one, first one was personal practices. The next way I group spiritual rituals and traditions is ones about creating community, and again, honoring and nurturing the social connection. The first one was much more individual, the personal practices. Now I'm looking at ones that involve a social connection. Religious gatherings of all sorts, whether it's specific services, masses, prayer sessions, specifically with uniquely defined religious groups is one way. It does create a sense of community. I know people who really look forward to going to church just because that is their social connection with the group. And it's important to feel that love and support. So that's one way. Rites of passage definitely are about creating community. Now what I mean by this is things like baptism or welcome to the world kind of rituals. There's usually a lot of different belief systems, some type of rite of passage going into adulthood from childhood. The one that I would immediately comes to mind is bar mitzvahs, which is Jewish boys, and bas mitzvahs is for Jewish girls, when they are becoming men and women. Weddings is a rite of passage when you become married. Funerals are a rite of passage. So it kind of spans the whole life span, if you will. But certain groups respect and honor these parts of the community. It's a way of getting great support. And again, it doesn't necessarily have to be religious. You know, for example, when people die, there's a lot of different rituals and traditions that people hold up. And even if it's, non-religious, completely non-religious, a group of people getting together to celebrate the life of someone who passed. These are very, very important social connections and traditions that honor that shared, whether it's shared joy or shared grief. And then things like charity and service would also fall under nurturing this social connection. It is not by coincidence that a lot of faith-based organizations are the ones that run our, often our soup kitchens, our homeless shelters, any number of outreach kind of services that, can create that sense of belonging, create that sense of community, regardless of where people are in their lives. So I'm going to ask the same questions again, only geared towards creating community. What should we be doing in the wellness centers? What should maybe we not do in the wellness centers, but we can encourage connection to these creating community kinds of practices? Any of you provide meals at your wellness center? Any of you encourage anyone to go to a local soup kitchen or free meal or some kind of outreach? I'll give you an example of one we do here in Trinity County. It was started by Boanna Gorchis, one of our peer specialists. Incredible lady. Kind of off the cuff one year, the Wellness Center volunteered to be wrapping presents for the Christmas celebration for the kids, where they give out presents for families in poverty. It's sponsored by, I think it's Northern California Catholic Charities, but there's a couple of different faith-based organizations in there, and we thought, okay, nobody has a lot of money, we can't go out and buy a lot of toys, but we could wrap the presents. Well, now it's a tradition. That is an example of a created tradition. Milestones is very much part of this community by every year taking responsibility for getting all the presents wrapped for the children's party. So we're decreasing stigma, we're a valued part of the community, and we are giving back to the community in this way using the faith-based community model. Just an example. Anyone else want to show anything, tell us anything, share?
Have a comment?
Yeah.
From Sarah Rupp. We provide meals at the Wellness Center, have done outreach as a group to soup kitchen and physical rehab facilities, wrap presents for inpatient units, and have a spirituality class that takes place.
Wow, you're doing a lot. You could have led this webinar. Very cool stuff and hits a lot of different levels. Thank you for sharing that.
Another one.
Yeah.
Our center provides brunch every Saturday and also a less organized lunch many other days. It has a pantry with food from county food banks. And
great.
We get limited amount of take home to eat while there.
Get limited amount of what? I'm sorry, I missed that.
Limited amount of food to take home while there.
Right. It's always amazing to me. I've taught a cultural diversity class for decades, and it has never ceased to amaze me how many of our rituals and traditions involve food, which is a great thing, and certainly something that's basic and primal, and something that a wellness center can do. I don't know if any of you were involved in it, but several years ago in one of these webinars, I gave a presentation on program development and enriching activities, and I talked about this idea of value-added programming. One of the things I mentioned as an example, that's what reminded me, is to encourage people to include a little ritual prior to sharing a meal. Most people who grow up in religious backgrounds immediately think of prayer. It doesn't have to be. It can be, let's take a minute of silence, let's take a minute to remember the people who are no longer with us, let's give thanks in some way. I have traditionally used a Native American talking stick, some kind of prelude to sitting down and sharing a meal. I think that enhances the feeling of a bonding, of this creating community kind of aspect. It's very spiritual. It's very meaningful that we're all in this together. Again, a lot of our clients, not all, but many of them, grew up in homes where they didn't do things together. They didn't have those kinds of bonds. They didn't have those kinds of routines. And initially, some of this may be uncomfortable for them. They're much more used to grabbing a sandwich and walking away, and don't see a mealtime as either a social or spiritual event. And remember what I said earlier about triggering symptoms through negative connotations. Sometimes when I have encouraged people to sit down and let's really share this meal together, you start hearing all sorts of stories about what their dinner table was like growing up, and it's not pretty. They may associate these social meals with a spiritual connotation with something very negative from their past. So again, that has to be addressed as well. Having said that, I see meal sharing as one of the most rich ways of sharing our beliefs, sharing our community, feeling included. So I compliment the people who are trying to do that. You know, and including everybody. You know, somebody may have such high level of anxiety it's hard for them to sit, but you know, in what way can we encourage them to be involved as well? Okay, any other comments?
Yes, there is one more.
Mm-hmm.
The churches in our area are wonderful about offering services to the community, such as providing food baskets at Thanksgiving and Christmas, and hosting pantry that provides needed items to low-income households, including toiletries, laundry, and soap, and like items that are a huge help to many families.
Absolutely. Where are you from? What county? We lost her. But to follow up on that comment, yes, a lot of the faith-based organizations, churches, etc., do this. They see this as part of their mission, is charity and outreach. And sometimes maybe the wellness center itself doesn't have to do these things, but the wellness centers are great conduits of information. You know, you can be letting people know, either on a group or an individual basis, what services are out there. You know, have you gone to this soup kitchen? Have you asked at this church about housing? You know, being the one who makes those connections, I see as a very big part of the wellness center roles. You can't do it all, but you can be kind of a linchpin in connecting people to other services. That's a good example. Okay, moving on. Where did this go? There we go. And then the last category, I lumped together the seasonal celebrations. Remember, the first one was personal practices, where you're talking individual. The second was creating community, where you're talking about social. And then this third category is connecting with nature. Some of you may have been on the webinar with me last month when I talked about plants and animals and the importance of nature. I did mention or implied that there was always a spiritual component to that, but I didn't go into a lot of detail. Many religious and spiritual traditions have specific festivals or celebrations linked to the seasons. And sometimes you'll see the fluidity of how these things blend together. For example, summer as the solstice celebration, the longest day of the year. Many ancient practices celebrated that as a holiday in their own right. Now it's more of a secular thing. There's a lot of Saint Day celebrations for the people who believe in the concept of saints. It's happened during the summer, and again, funny story I have to share from my personal experience and why I wrote it like this is I used to live in a little country called Malta, which is an island in the Mediterranean, and it is about 99% Roman Catholic. Catholicism is their official religion. But this is a country that has very much a village-oriented life. Everything happens within the various villages. And so each village has their own church and also has their own patron saint. And there's actually a little competition between the villages who puts on the best festivals. But the part that's funny is that somehow in Malta they decided that all of the saints were born between May and October. So that way they could have festivals in the summer. So that's an example. It's not disrespectful. Their patron saints are very, very important to them. But it's kind of the natural way of people adapt whatever the tradition is to their own situations. So these festivals go on from May to October, and every week there's at least 2 parishes that are celebrating something. And so it becomes a geographic thing, it becomes a patriotic thing, does have very much a religious connotation as well. In the fall, we have a whole lot. We have, wherever these all come from, primarily what they are is harvest feasts, whether it's Thanksgiving or the equinox, the All Saints and All Souls Day, All Hallows Day, Day of the Dead. These all involve people passing on and honoring that, but also honoring the fruits of the earth. A lot of people do not know that our secular holiday of Thanksgiving was heavily based on the Jewish Sukkot, which was a holy day, harvest feast. So this picture that you have here on the right, that's an example of a sukkah, which is a traditional thing that Orthodox or conservative Jewish people, traditional Jewish people, celebrate the Sukkot, or the harvest. They make a temporary shelter. It's always supposed to be temporary. They get the whole family to decorate it. Because it's in the fall, there is a lot of things that look similar to Halloween or Thanksgiving, pumpkins, squash, vines, what's left over from the wheat and the corn is used to build these things. Now, in Jewish tradition, the purpose of the sukkah was to remind people of the exile of the Jewish people who didn't have permanent housing. So it's celebrating, honoring their nomadic tradition in the times when they did not have a homeland. But it also is one of the many, many cultural ways that you see the celebrating of the harvest, sustaining life, the food that comes from the earth. So again, these things have sometimes very ancient roots, but they evolve or adapt over the years. In the fall, we all know Christmas, Yuletide, and various religious or non-religious New Year's Eve celebrations, and again the solstice, the shortest day of the year. This is again an example of, I think ultimately this is about celebrating nature. You may have many other very intense, very sacred beliefs, but for example, the vast majority of Christian scholars do not believe that the historical figure of Jesus was born in December. He was born probably in March. But why do we celebrate it then? We've celebrated then because we borrowed a lot of traditions from Nordic and Druidic beliefs. Some of the things we hold very dearly as Christmas didn't originate with Christianity at all. They are various Yule celebrations, Christmas trees, wreaths, lights on them, present giving, most of the things that we associate with the secular Christmas. I'm not trying to denigrate any belief. I'm saying that there's a lot of commonalities in the way we express these things. And one of them has to do with the expression of the seasons and our connecting with the earth, regardless of what other beliefs you have on top of that. One of the reasons the New Year is usually around then is because the winter solstice recognizes that that's when the days start getting longer. So we're starting over again. Very tied to nature. Okay. And the spring. is a lot of different holidays, Christians associated with Easter, but it has to do with cleansing or rebirth or renewal. So there's a lot of different rituals and traditions that celebrate that sense of nature. So again, this is the last category. We did personal, we did social, now we're doing nature ones. What can be done to incorporate these ideas into your Wellness Center program, or what can or should be done to support it outside the center? I think probably a lot of you do this. It's just so much fun and so festive and so enjoyable to participate in decorating and crafts and different kinds of representations, celebrations, festivals. I think particularly these seasonal ones more than any others give us the opportunity to track time, track events over time, and to use a lot of creativity and involvement to represent that. There's nothing wrong with that. In fact, it's wonderful. I'm a big believer in activities. I will make crafts every day of the year if I can, but I usually, next week, we'll be doing St. Patrick's Day things, and we'll be doing a spring tree for various kinds of decorations. Two issues, and this one goes back to some of the downfalls of involving spirituality. I think one does need to be careful not to have an overt belief system that you're kind of pushing. It's kind of impossible at Christmas because Christmas in this country is so ubiquitous. It's all over the place. But you can separate out the secular holiday from the religious holiday. But also, this is a great time to ask other people who may not share the dominant belief system in your particular county to step up, ask them, how can we help you celebrate your tradition? Would you be willing to share your traditions with someone else? For example, if you have people of Jewish faith in your community, that may be the perfect time to find a way to include them. Tell us about your celebrations. Teach us. You probably all know that Hanukkah is closely timed with Christmas. What you may not know is that Hanukkah was never one of the big major holidays in Judaism. It was considered a minor holiday, not one of the major ones. But it became very big in this country because of timing. Instead of the Jewish children being resentful or jealous of kids who had a Christmas tree and got presents, the concept of Hanukkah was raised where they could, get presents and have a visual symbol of their belief system. But from a wellness center perspective, it's a great time to say, hey, let me learn something from you. If you have anyone in your community who is Muslim, how wonderful it is for them to dispel some stereotypes and negativity and share with people how Ramadan is celebrated and what it means. I think part of the recovery and wellness perspective, as I've mentioned before, has to do with respect for diversity. But probably one of the most important components is inclusion, and that means decreasing stigma. How do we honor everybody and their belief systems? Anyone want to share something?
There is a comment. On a retreat for the No Stigma Speakers Bureau, we decorated rocks with paint to express our gratitude for recovery. On that same retreat, one of the members led a meditation of relaxation for the 30 present in an outdoor location in 3 rivers in the nearby mountains of Tulare County.
Fabulous. And I think the thing to understand about spirituality is that it is how you feel inside. It's about hope, it's about recovery, it's about forgiveness, it's about belonging. And just looking at the outside traditions, someone may not understand that at first. So you need to kind of explain it. But that was a great way. You incorporated a whole lot of things. May have never said the words religion or spirituality. And it wasn't necessarily religious, but it clearly, in my mind, what you're talking about was spiritual. Uh, so people are still a little uncomfortable talking in those terms, but I think we do have to talk about it more, including some of the dangers that I mentioned. It is a part of us. It's whatever your beliefs are. I think most people do agree that there is something else besides the physical that we can see. You know, the ground we walk on, the flesh, the blood, the muscles. What else is there? And whatever you call that, that would go into the spiritual realm. Uh, Again, another story, forgive me my stories, but when I was living in Malta, that's a great example because they have a state religion, Catholicism, so everything is geared towards that. But one thing that I found very interesting is that the Maltese are very, very open and accepting over other people's beliefs. There is a synagogue in Malta. There is a mosque in Malta. They not only allow those celebrations, they have laws to protect people's right to do that, to take prayer breaks or whatever they need to do. They're very serious about that. What they don't understand as a culture is people who have no beliefs. They'll respect different beliefs, but they really cannot get how someone couldn't have some beliefs, spiritual beliefs. They think that's really weird. It's like acknowledging everything except for your right hand. It's so part of the way they think. Unlike an American culture where we have very much separated what we call church and state, they don't get that. And I've seen this in other places I've traveled in the world. How can you do that? Again, America did it for some very good reasons. They did it to actually protect religious freedoms that were denied to them before they came here. So there's always a story, there's always a history, and I actually like finding out about those stories. But thank you for sharing your examples. They're really good ones. Okay, I do want to give a few more additional suggestions, and these are the resources that were provided to you. Remember earlier on I told you the one I got from the web that listed all the different forms of meditation and what the specific religious beliefs are about them. That was one handout. The other one I gave you was a booklet that was written by SAMHSA, Substance Abuse Mental Health Service Agency, that's federal government. I'm sure most of you are familiar with SAMHSA. They came up with a really, really nice little booklet, I think, called Building Bridges. And the whole point was to coordinate people from wellness centers or people with mental illness to coordinate and talk with people in the faith-based community and to figure out roles and roles. They really laid it out very nice. You know, here's where the individual comes in, here's where the mental health agencies come in, and here's where the faith-based communities, churches, etc. come in, and who can do what and how to work together. We have had a couple of panels up here in Trinity County where we have represented people from various aspects of the faith-based community, from the Buddhist Kampa, from a couple of the Christian churches, from the Catholic Church, from the Native American church. It's a representative of one of the healers who represents their very diverse, actually, spiritual beliefs. And we've had these panels working directly with staff, and it's been very helpful. We've done it as part of our ongoing cultural competence. But I think we're really getting to the point of feeling comfortable, referring back and forth to each other, and being clear on who does what when. So I would strongly suggest looking at that booklet you got, printing it out. I thought it was very well done and very helpful. Some of you already mentioned some things that you already do with your local faith-based community. But one of the things that struck me when we had this panel, I can't remember which minister or religious leader said it, but they were asking us for help. They said, you know, we don't always know how to work with people who have serious mental problems with serious mental illness. Can we refer them to you? Can we do this together? And of course it gets all kind of blurry with confidentiality laws, but they are reaching out to us as much as we are reaching out to them in terms of how can we best help people. So I think that's an important part. Again, you don't have to do it all. You may not be in a situation where you have the time or energy or expertise to do more specific activities within the center, but I really urge you to make a coordinated effort to work with your local faith-based community and share with them. And the other suggestion, and someone mentioned they already do this, is consider offering a structured spirituality group. You may not initially feel comfortable with that or quite understand what that entails, so I did provide another additional resource. It's called the Spiritual Self-Care Manual and Toolkit. It does a really nice job not only giving the background and a lot more detail than I was able to do in this webinar, but also very, very specific ideas for and structure for how one would run such a group. It was done by the Los Angeles Community Department of Mental Health, and interestingly enough, partnered with the California Institute for Mental Health, CIMH, who sponsors these webinars. I actually found this on the CIMH webinar, but one of the problems that we all know exists with the information age is that there is so much out there, even in organizations we're familiar with. You can't always find things. So I copied it out of there and asked Shoshana to send it on to you. Instead of having you search for it yourself. It is there if you want. I think a good idea would be, even if you don't feel ready to present this, is take a look at this toolkit and then talk to the rest of your staff. You know, is this something you think we need? Should we go this way? Do we have the time to do this? Do we have someone who's interested in leading it? Whoever is interested in leading such a group, I would really hope they would be someone who would pay attention to all those precautions that I listed on the what could go wrong slide. Because sometimes you could do more harm than help unless you have a pretty clear idea of what your role is and what it isn't, and how this relates to recovery, which is what our wellness centers are all about. Questions? Okay, we're wrapping up for today. Again, if you want it one more time, is there any suggestion from this webinar you'd like to see implemented in your center? One idea you want to explore a little more? Can you share that? Well, hopefully it's because you're all reflecting and being very meditative on what you heard, and it will come to you. And hopefully you just gives you something to think about, which you may or may not want to put into certain parts of your Wellness Center programming. The next webinar, I'm very excited that we're going to have some guest speakers. The title of it is Healthy Eating, Active Living, the HEAL program. Chelsea Olney, Sarah Welsh, and Lynn Erickson, who are all from Circle of Friends. Circle of Friends is a wellness center that's sponsored by Hill Country Health and Wellness in Round Mountain / Bernie, California. So I really hope you join us for that. I'm very much looking forward to that. I know they're working hard on putting their PowerPoint presentation together right now. And that will be the last one for this year's series. So I really hope you join us on April 9th. It should be. I'm really looking forward to hearing more about this program. So as usual, thank you very, very much. If you have any additional questions, feel free to write directly to me, or if Shoshana as well can handle a lot of the questions about the logistics of all these things. We do very much like to hear some feedback.
Thank you very much, Anne.
You're welcome. I enjoyed doing these, and I hope people enjoyed it and got some useful information out of it. Again, I'll say one more time, do not hesitate to write to me with any comments or questions. If you were too shy to say them on the air, or if the technology was just not working well for that, emails may be easier for you, and I'd love to hear some follow-up. So again, thank you very much, and have a great day.
Thank you. Bye. Bye, everyone.
Bye.